Hello, my name is Pat Guinan. I'm an extension state climatologist with the University of Missouri. We'll talk a little bit about today about the flash drought Missouri experienced back in 2012. It indeed was a historical event, one that I've been here for 32 years and never seen one when it comes to the magnitude and how quickly things went downhill in regard to the flash drought of 2012. It began in the spring and it persisted through most of the summer. And unfortunately, that's the worst possible timing and where you could experience a flash drought starting in the spring and then just continuing through the heart of the growing season. And indeed, that's what happened. You can see in the upper right on May 1st, 2012, there really was no drought to speak of in our state. We had some dry conditions in northeast and southeast Missouri, but by the end of July, you can see extreme to exceptional drought covering most of the state, and by the end of August, that exceptional drought expanded even more in parts of western and southeast Missouri. Most of the rest of the state was in extreme drought. There were some variables that really acted with this dry condition to give the drought some teeth, and I'll talk a little bit about those variables later. I mentioned them here, and then the impacts from this drought were just amazing in regard to how many there were and the sectors that were impacted. And what really stuck out in my mind was, of course, how quickly they emerged, but the vulnerability issues that were exposed in our state. And yet it was really a short-lived drought when we provide historic perspective. The middle image does show the May through August average precipitation. You can see 2012 ranked as the third driest on record. You have to go all the way back to 1953 to find nearly 60 years to find a similar dry period for that May through August period. Crop conditions were just tanked. They went downhill quickly for corn, soybean, and pastures and ranges, as you can see in the lower left, showing 2012, the red line, just how the percentage that were in good to excellent conditions. They just took a tumble starting in May and through the end of June and on through the rest of the growing season. And then on the bottom right, just really kind of hits home on how short-lived this drought was when you provide historic perspective. On the right is 1952 to 1956. We had 5 consecutive growing seasons with drought versus what we saw in 2012, just one severe drought during that growing season. And yet those little bubbles you see just to the left are all the impacts that we saw in our state. It went way beyond agriculture. Most other sectors were impacted by this exceptional dry period. I talked a little bit about some of this briefly about the supplemental variables that really acted with the lack of precip to give this drought some teeth. Temperature was one of them. 2012 was our warmest year on record. That dryness began in January or in the fall and persisted through the spring into the summer. We had our warmest spring on record in 2012. We had our warmest March on record, so on and so forth. We were breaking records left and right with this highly unusual temperature departures that we were seeing here in Missouri. In March, we actually had more of a March that was more typical of Louisiana in regard to temperatures. That's just how unbelievably warm. And that warmth really kind of it exacerbated the situation in regard to the lack of precip that we saw during the growing season of 2012. Another issue was the water vapor, the moisture content of the atmosphere. And these are vapor pressure deficits using mesonet data. We have some history of over 25 years of records of vapor pressure deficits, and that's the green line is the average, and you can see the orange is what we saw in 2012. So anything above that green line shows a drier than average atmosphere. And so you can see we had low humidities, we had these large vapor pressure deficits, and that's a variable that's nice to use because it's very important in plant and water relations, and it's for when it comes to growing plants because it controls the transpiration rates of the vegetation. And so we saw a very efficient and dry atmosphere when it comes to transpiration losses during that growing season. And that, again, in addition to high temperatures, these high vapor pressure deficits that were contributing, giving teeth to the lack of precip to make the flash drought. Radiation obviously is very important. Solar energy is the driving force when it comes to evaporative demand. We have pyranometers on our mesonet stations, so we're able to get an idea of what's average during the growing season when it comes to solar output using our pyranometers. And the pinks, those are the blue dots, and then the pink dots are what we saw in 2012. There were only 3 cloudy days from May 1st to the end of July here in mid-Missouri. And so it was just an amazing, a lot of sun's energy that was able to get to the surface and actually really ramp up those evaporation losses. So we had high vapor pressure deficits, we had high temperatures, we had lack of precip, and we had a lot of solar radiation making it to the surface and bringing this really high evaporative demand. Of course, when you combine those variables in addition with wind, you can calculate potential evapotranspiration. These are ET rates over the past decade, and you can see 2012, that line, as you accumulate evapotranspiration from May 1st to the end of August, nothing comes close to the water loss that we saw in 2012. And so another way to look at that on the evaporative losses that we saw, you can use Class A pan evaporation records, which are shown in the lower right, indeed showing how unusual 2012 was. You have to go back to 1988, 1980. Those were historic droughty heat wave years here in Missouri and for the Midwest, for that matter, and even the Southern Plains. But indeed, we just saw all these unusual factors that came into place to really give the drought some teeth and make it a flash drought that persisted into the summer. Another characteristic I always like to look at are the soil characteristics, because here in Missouri we have actually quite a few high clay content soils, which has an impact. It's a little bit more hard. It's harder for the root systems to tap into those the water molecules that adhere to the clay-like soils and be able to use that water for growth. And so soil characteristics are very important, especially when you consider a drought that starts in the spring when row crops are being planted. You need some moisture and the root systems to tap into that. And so better soils in Iowa and Illinois, if all else being equal, we likely see more impacts showing up more quickly here in Missouri, considering the flash drought that we saw in 2012, and indeed that was the case. Again, I mentioned how timing, it's all about timing. It was the worst possible timing early in the growing season to go into this droughty situation. And we saw impacts. And obviously here are impacts from mid-Missouri around Columbia and just east of Columbia. By the early June, we were seeing on the left that picture showing scorched tips of corn, the curled leaves. In the middle picture, those soybeans, some of the seeds were not, there was no moisture in the soil to germinate, and so we had uneven emergence. And then on the right there, we saw by the end of June, we saw corn that was tasseling and it wasn't even 4 feet tall. So it was very evident we were seeing major crop issues, major crop losses, yield reductions, and yet at the same time you can see the drought monitor map. It took a little while to catch up with these conditions. They were only showing abnormally dry conditions in early June as you look at through much of mid-Missouri, and then as you go to the right, by the end of June, only moderate drought conditions. I would say it was worse than that, considering what these pictures are revealing in regard to drought stress. Communication is highly important when getting the word out when these conditions start to occur, and I think we did a pretty good job in getting the word out. We used the cooperative media group here with the University of Missouri Extension, and those news releases went out and to all the news outlets. And then the word flash drought, that middle image, came from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch on May 23rd. We did another news release by May 25th, and with the title Flash Drought, and then National Public Radio picked it up. In the bottom issue, or the bottom, you can see the news release, the flash drought threatens to destroy Missouri. And so these were just some of the highlights or some of the quotes starting in the middle part of May, where we began to recognize the situation was looking pretty dire, and to get the word out that these impacts were not going to go away. In fact, they were likely going to worsen. And so it's very important to get that information out and to let the state administrators and the decision makers at the state and national level know what we're experiencing. The response in Missouri was nothing short of amazing. They quickly recognized the situation, and there was a lot of coordinated efforts with the administration, state, federal, private, and volunteer agencies, organizations, associations. many groups and cooperatives that really went in full force to try to mitigate the situation we were experiencing. We had a lot of resources that were put together. Emergency cost share programs were used from the Soil and Water Conservation Program and the districts with the Department of Natural Resources, and to help dig existing wells and make them deeper and to drill new ones. There were projects approved for connections to water systems, emergency grants for running pipes and installing pumps, waivers for oversized loads of hay for livestock, conservation release program working with the FSA to release livestock for grazing. State Emergency Operations Center was activated. We had an online hay directory, as well as, and at the very bottom bullet there, you can see on July 17th, by mid-July, actually Missouri became the first state where the governor had submitted and all the counties were declared a drought disaster by the USDA. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about the flash drought in Missouri.